Da 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 da! What's my good cheer? Welcome, everybody. I am closing off the day with my live show. Second day into my days off and feeling well rested and energized and ready to take on a world that's going to look a little bit the landscape anyway is going to look a little bit different than it has been in the past couple of years, right? And sometimes that change is difficult, especially when it's not initiated by ourselves. And that's why I say sometimes, it is in riding those waves, right? It's in riding those waves, knowing tomorrow's coming, right? Tomorrow's coming anyway. So, you know what? If you put your best foot forward, your best attitude towards whatever you have to face, right? Say you'll do the best that you can, right? Things usually do work out. Hi, if you've never met me before, I'm Cindy. I explore the inside and the outside, and we're going to give YouTube a couple of minutes. But in the meantime, I'll let you know that we have been working on a deck of 54 cards. We're on our 43rd word. Pretty incredible that I have been able to show up every single week with a new word, powerful word, and be able to dig into it, maybe not beautifully, maybe not without its flaws and its misinformation, but the intent was there. That accountability in showing up, right? Knowing what the lesson, I got the lesson, and it was up to me whether or not to show up, right? Being that person who wants to be the evidence, right? I have to show up. I have to be that evidence, right? That it can be done. That's the whole point. And magnificently with that attitude, pat on my shoulder, but it was a bit of a community project in right in that digestion, right? That digesting of information, that digesting of understandings that gave me different perspectives to look at things a little bit differently, quite often by putting myself in other people's shoes and appreciating those experiences that I felt I was in, and look at those experiences and look at the other characters and how those experiences might have impacted them too. And in that, sometimes we can find a little bit of forgiveness, sometimes for ourselves, sometimes for other people. Sometimes it's just being able to get it and just to be able to put it on the shelf and put it to bed, right? I don't know. We are on our 43rd word. I would say pretty darn good. But that 43rd word has thrown me for a bit of a loop. I went into you guys know I like to Google these words usually the second day after I do my first perspective. I go in and I Google it. And a lot of these words being powerful words, they're words that we use in our lives all the time. We kind of know what the meanings are. But again, that's our perspectives, our understandings, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the truth, that it's a true understanding. Because, right, we get our information from lots of places, and sometimes that information is freely sought after, and sometimes that information is digested by those who are serving it. And it's to each one of us to make those choices, right? Of how an important conversation, an experience, an adventure, a relationship is, right? To each one of us. And that's where we get to make those decisions. And that's where we're going to find the change that comes into our life. I did some Googling today on this word truth, our 43rd word. And, when I was in school, I was taught that if you used the word that you are asked to give the definition of, it doesn't count. You're not allowed to use the word that you're defining in the definition. And this is what I kept finding when I was looking for the definition. They talked a lot about, I don't know, about beliefs, but we know quite often, because there are so many beliefs out there, because we understand not every single belief can be a truth. Somebody's got to be wrong, right? Somebody's got to be wrong. And not necessarily has anybody got to be right in that, too. For my own understanding, right? Those understandings are so far off, and yet we push to the boundaries that need to know, right? We are puzzle solvers naturally. Me personally, I do not like puzzles. I'll do a word search every once in a while, but I can't tell you the last time I did a word search, probably decades. But that would only be like if I was on the plane or something and I had to distract myself. That's what I would be doing, word searches. So I couldn't trust in the right. I probably could have trust. I could have delved deeper, but because in the first few explanations in that word, they were so, again, different. And, this has come across my path a couple of times this week, that, we do look at certain actions, right? Certain personality traits, different emotions. We look at people that are different, and we really, right? We really separate people in those differences. But, I move with common values. I move with common values, and that's the truth. I have to move with those common values, because I know who I am. I know what I represent. I know how I feel, and I recognize people who kind of move like I do. Nobody ever moves like I do, and I don't move like anybody else does either. Each one of us is unique in that. But we do find commonalities, that where we can find ways to make connections, and actually have friendships. And I've had some very, very amazing people, amazing characters, right, come into my life, and they've impacted my life greatly. And I'd have to say that is 100% the truth. Okay, so we're going to go into the topic of truth. Finally, let's just have a sip of my coffee. In my US Nassau cup. I've had this for ages. It's the perfect size for a cup of coffee for me. Yeah, I do like that cup. So today I thought I would talk a little bit about truth when it comes to my own life. I keep things pretty simple, uh, because I know that I can wrap myself in over explaining myself. I can over what do you call that? You know what I used to, as a child and as a young adult, I used to get blamed for things that I did and do. But it was so often, it was like daily, it was just part of my life. It got to the point where I didn't really put much effort on defending. That's the word I was looking for. Defending myself. When I was younger, I did a lot of that, a lot of it. It wasn't me, but, right, playing the role that I was playing in my family dynamics, it was landing in my lap, and I learned to not fight it, not argue it. Nobody was going to listen anyway. Nobody cared anyway. They had already made their decision as to what the truth was. And putting any effort quite often would make the situation even worse. So quite often I would give up in that defending and fighting for what was my truth. I just said, whatever. But it didn't mean that I didn't recognize it, that I didn't recognize that I was being put in my place, that I didn't recognize that I was being asked to digest something that wasn't true to me. And the reason I recognize that is because I had one of my sisters and my mother who were very creative in their lives, right? Very creative. And remind me, because there was a span where I did become a very, very bad liar, right? I was always a bad liar, right? Bad liar. Yeah. So bad I wasn't very good at it. But it was another reason why I didn't lie. But I did have a sister and a mother who were very good at it. And because I was a spectator quite often, right? What's the point of saying anything, right? Don't have something good to say. Don't say anything at all. That I would recognize and I would spot and I would analyze everything that came out of their mouths. And I come to recognize that quite often they had to come back to those lies and rehash them. And they would have to go into their minds and think, oh, what did I say? And they would say it differently and they would trip themselves up. And I wouldn't be the ones calling them in their lies. It would be somebody else calling them on those lies. And you could tell that the person knew that these fibs and little lies were happening. But also it was very difficult for my sister and my mother because there was a lot of energy in covering the tracks, covering the lies, right? There was a lot of, so I learned, right? Not only just to accept and not defend myself and over explain myself. And that's not quite true because I am quite an over explainer. But that is now only in the defense of myself. And that's me coming to the table for myself now. It's kind of uncomfortable, right? But I'm not holding the fault for others. I feel that intent. I've always felt the intent, but I didn't feel that I had the, well, I felt probably I had permission. I knew my place, and I just kept my place throughout my entire life. And I have to say, it made things quite easy for me, right? It took away a lot of the aggression. It took a lot away of that all of a sudden that focus onto me when I was defending myself or having my say, that I hadn't become, what was that say, um, just not seen, just not heard, right? And I tried to do as much as that as I possibly can because it was less painful that way. So, in recognizing those traits in my mother and one of my sisters, I just decided I just can't be bothered with that kind of exertion in that covering of my tracks. I don't have a good memory to start with. Plus, in living in guilt and shame all my life, right? Those were I get trigger, I go straight to guilt and shame. And, when I told the lie, oh my goodness, I told a lie, that guilt and shame would come straight to the surface. So it just became easier, right? It's not because I didn't want to lie, right? If I thought I could get away with it, maybe I might have tried. If I thought that guilt and shame was not going to surface, right? But I wasn't good at it. And I know how I was going to feel in that lying. And even worse, the guilt and shame, it would also be attached to be caught in my lies. And that was the example that my sister and my mother set for me, right? It's pretty good example, yet they were bad examples in that themselves. But it gave me some insight for myself that I carried into my adulthood. I make it I make it part of my life to avoid conflict. Yes, I don't like to be triggered, but I am, right, stepping to the plate when need be in my own defense. I have to, because I have to show up for myself. If I don't show up for myself, nobody else is going to show up for me, right? And that's my truth. And it just seems really funny in some of these really deep conversations that I have. They're heavy conversations. They're things that I'm testing out in the ideas. They're things that I'm hashing over, right, in my live shows, because I show up every single day. And lots of times when I'm showing up later in the evening, and I've taken in a few lessons. I've had a few conversations. I've probably had an experience or an adventure, right? I would hope so. Even just the little ones, right? So I wanted to say in for myself, and then maybe you might be able to take this as a lesson for yourself. Being truthful has always been the very best way for me to make movement. Okay, in saying that, I said, remind me. Nobody's here to remind me. So I reminded myself, because it is an important, right? Truth, and how it affected me when I was a compulsive gambler. I gambled on those video lottery terminals for over 20 years. I destroyed my marriage. I made great money in a job that I loved. I put a lot of work into myself physically and, well, emotionally, because I'm not going to say mentally, because I didn't resolve any of the issues that I had when I lost, because I was also 311 pounds. I lost a great deal of weight, and it did change my outlook, right? That bright and that light, it came to the surface, and I created the most magnificent life for myself and marriage for myself. But being a compulsive gambler, it brought me down. It put me into a negative state, right? My marriage didn't have a chance after that. Where the truth comes into that is I lied in all that span, right? And I say, I recognize how much easier life is for me not to lie, because in that span of 20 years that I was a compulsive gambler, I'm thinking it was probably pretty close to 20 years, right? We're going on our fifth year now. No, no gambling. I think it's the end of this September. It'll be 5 years. No gambling. I remember just bawling my eyes out to whoever or whatever. Just take this problem from me, because it's destroying me. It's destroying everything. And it did. It destroyed my marriage. It destroyed my finances. I almost ended up homeless. It ruined the relationships with my sisters, right? It put me into a negative state where there was no chance for that, right? Unless I hit a big one. And how often did that happen? right? And just as fast as that happened, just seconds later, it would be all gone back into that problem that I had. So I remember lying about how much I made in tips that night, right? What I did with my money. I became a budget grocery shopper. Oh, right. I became very creative in those meal makings and that budget. I cut back on a lot of those things that would have been extras, right? Whether it was entertainment or adventures or time with my husband, right? All of that was neglected. And in the end, right, I put myself in a state. And when I put myself into a state, I allowed it to take over. It became my life. My marriage was over, finances were totally messed. There was no hope. And just some little outing, right? Went camping and made a video. And the next thing you know, I'm a bit of a YouTuber. Things were getting a little bit better. Wanted to spend my money on gas so I could go out onto the road and make more videos. I was moving pretty good and I was feeling pretty good. And then again, the weight started falling off. And that positive was setting back into my life again. And I found myself searching out new things that I could be addicted in a healthy way, right? We're talking about healthy habits, right? I found mindset and I got pulled out of that nightmare because it had definitely become a nightmare and it could have been something permanent. But I don't think so because I think I would have ended up, right? Homeless on the streets. And when you're homeless on the streets, you don't have extra money to play the VLTs. But if I was sitting on a corner and I was begging, you can guarantee after that session of begging where I would be taking that handful of change. And that's the truth. I know how to lie because, well, I had good examples, right? I had good examples, but my own choices, right? When I'm straight of mind, right? That I'm not covering my tracks. And I don't know why I thought that I possibly could cover my tracks, but there didn't seem to be another solution in that. So I had those examples in my life of what lying does and what covering your tracks does and remembering what you say from one moment to the next, right? And feeling foolish and allowing that guilt and shame to come to the surface because somebody recognized that you told a fib. So grateful that I'm not playing video lottery terminals anymore, right? That I don't have to be a compulsive liar, that I don't have to lie about, why my house bills aren't paid. That in baby steps that I'm learning financing for the first time in my life. I'm not very good at it, but you know what? I'm taking those baby steps anyway because I understand that, right, somewhere's down the road it might serve me, right? It might serve me. So I just wanted to talk, right? Because I couldn't think this word truth. It's a doozy. It really is because, right? If I could get away with lying, well, I probably think that I would have been a pretty big liar, but I couldn't. That right? And it wasn't because I couldn't get away with it, right? Right? I could make a truth or an untruth sound like a truth, but that guilt and shame would have been triggered, and that guilt and shame is not something that I want in my life, because the guilt and the shame, ah, it triggers in that lack of value that I have for myself, right? It's a heartbreaker, right? It's something that's attached into my life, and it's kind of the squeeze once in a while, right? Just to keep me just to keep me on track, right? It is good company, because it does keep me on track. And I understand if that guilt and shame does come to the surface, that's something I'm going to look at, right? That's something I'm going to put my attention on and take care of almost immediately, because I've got those lessons now, right? And I understand that I'm not going to be able to keep that stronghold on those. Well, those are the hiccups, right? Those are the failures, those are the missteps, and those are the not staying on track and letting the slips roll back in, right? But if we learn to catch them when they happen, right, maybe we can do a little something about it. But it sure does help not having to cover your tracks. I tell you, covering your tracks is it's the worst feeling. It's just the absolute, especially when you're lying to the people that you care about the most. That's the most devastating. It's not because you're lying just because you, right, because you can get away with it, and because so and so's a jerk or they deserve it. They're not gonna, right? It's just it's just because they don't have any other choice, right? They want to feel like maybe they're the big shot, that they know better, right? It can be a narcissistic trait. I do have past relationships with people who would just spew the most incredible things and just think that that you're supposed to just take it as fact. But again, sometimes, right, you pick your battles, right? It's, okay. Right? And sometimes you're going, no, you're not going to feed me that crap, right? But each one of us get to make those choices for ourselves, right? So that's what I'm bringing to the table tonight when it comes to this word truth, right? Because I do recognize, right, that lying, that that spewing of untruths that are presented like they're truths. And sometimes I say something, sometimes, right? I can't be bothered, because I understand that that trigger that was for me, right? That made it to the point where I couldn't be bothered, that it was easier for me not to stir that pot, might be the trigger for somebody else, which might turn into something, right, that will trigger you, because it's just not lying. It's a whole bunch of things. But that's what we do here. We work on them, right? Baby steps, right? Baby steps. Okay, you guys, that's my good chair.